In the vast, silent theater of space, most discoveries arrive quietly. They don't announce themselves with trumpet calls or cosmic fireworks, but rather with a faint pulse in the data, a strange reading, a slight deviation, a light that lingers too long in the wrong spectrum. That's how it began with 3I Atlas. At first glance, it was just another interstellar object, another visitor from beyond, passing through, minding its own business. We've seen these before. Oumuamua in 2017, Borisov in 2019. But this one was different. Bigger, faster, stranger. And when the James Webb Space Telescope, humanity's most powerful eye in the sky, turned its gaze toward this cosmic intruder, it saw something that defied every known principle of natural motion. It wasn't the object's size that shocked scientists, though it dwarfed every previous interstellar visitor. It wasn't even its speed, though it traveled at over 130,000 miles per hour, fast enough to circle Earth 5 times in a minute. No, the real horror, the real, cold, creeping fear, came from what Webb saw trailing behind it. A glow, not random, not chaotic, but measured, focused, and directional. This wasn't the tail of a comet. This wasn't sunlight bouncing off ice and rock. This was something else entirely. A heat signature, a propulsion trail, exhaust. And that changed everything. Because if 3I Atlas is emitting thrust, then it's not just moving. It's navigating. And if it's navigating, if it's adjusting its course, then someone or something is flying it. To understand the magnitude of what we're facing, you need to step back, not just from the telescope, but from your understanding of how the cosmos works. Natural celestial objects don't behave like this. They don't appear from nowhere, travel faster than any spacecraft ever built, and coast through gravitational fields with the grace of an experienced pilot. But that's exactly what 3I Atlas has done. When it was first spotted, its trajectory was unlike anything astronomers had seen before, not elliptical, like comets or asteroids bound by our sun, but hyperbolic. A one-way ticket through our solar system, a visitor with no intention of staying. At least, that's what we thought. Then came the size estimates. Not hundreds of feet like Oumuamua, not even miles, but between 6 and 9 miles in diameter. That's the size of Manhattan, a moving island, hurtling through space at speeds that laugh in the face of our physics. How do you accelerate something that big without it tearing itself apart? How do you keep it structurally intact across thousands of years and millions of light years? The answer is simple. You don't, unless you're not bound by the limitations of nature. At those speeds and that scale, even minor deviations would shatter any natural object into fragments. But 3I Atlas isn't crumbling. It's stable, controlled. Its speed hasn't decreased through planetary encounters. It's increased. The object has coasted past massive gravitational fields without being pulled off course. In fact, it seems to be using them, as if slingshotting itself around each planet with calculated precision, a maneuver we call a gravitational assist. That technique is used by NASA, but this object is doing it better than us, with no propulsion that we can see, until now. That's when the tail appeared. Not a natural outgassing of ice and dust like comets exhibit when approaching the sun. This wasn't vapor. It was hot, directional energy, something pushing the object forward, or slowing it down. And that's when it hit the team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. This is not a comet, it's a vehicle. There's a truth hidden in the stars, written not in light, but in motion. And 3I Atlas is writing a story more precise, more haunting, and more deliberate than any natural object we've ever tracked. Let's talk about its path. When scientists at NASA and the European Southern Observatory charted its route through the solar system, what they found made the room go silent. The object wasn't just coasting through space, it was touring. First, it skimmed Mars, close enough for serious observation, but far enough to avoid being caught in gravitational snare. Then, it plotted a course toward Earth, not directly, but in a calculated arc that would bring it within observation range while hiding it behind the glare of the sun during closest approach. It was as if the object knew exactly how to use the cosmos itself as a cloak. After Earth, it veers toward Venus, then Jupiter. 4 planets, perfectly aligned, in a sequence that maximizes observational opportunities while minimizing human interference. Statistically, this kind of path is impossible. Astronomers ran simulations. They found that the chance of a natural object following this precise sequence, at these speeds, with this alignment, is less than 0.005%. That's not nature, that's planning. And here's where it gets disturbing. The path seems optimized for planetary surveillance. Not flybys, not collisions, surveillance. Imagine you're an alien civilization wanting to study a solar system without being seen. You'd want a path that gathers the most data, with the least chance of detection. That's exactly what 3I Atlas is doing. The object isn't drifting blindly, it's performing reconnaissance. And then came the worst realization of all: the time of its arrival. Scientists now estimate that 3I Atlas began its journey toward us nearly 8,000 years ago, right around the time human civilization began to rise. That's when we built the first cities, discovered agriculture, developed language. And if this object was dispatched, then it wasn't by accident, it was in response. For years, we've waited for the James Webb Space Telescope to do what no other telescope could: look deeper, farther, and clearer than ever before. But no one expected it to catch a moving machine in the act of flying across our solar system. Yet that's exactly what happened. When Webb turned its infrared gaze toward 3I Atlas, the initial data looked strange. There was a glow, not a reflection, but a thermal emission. Something hot, something localized, something directed. Spectrographic analysis revealed that this wasn't gas venting from ice. It was a steady exhaust, like the faint trail of an ion engine or a low-thrust propulsion system. It was symmetrical, sustained, and completely inconsistent with any known cometary behavior. NASA didn't announce this. Of course they didn't. But internal memos leaked. Webb had observed heat pulses from a region on the object's rear end, pulses that cycled every 19 seconds, each one leaving behind a measurable change in trajectory. This wasn't just propulsion, it was course correction, steering, controlled thrust. But the most alarming detail came not from the energy, but from the material. Embedded within the glow were traces of superconductive elements, materials that do not exist in nature, at least not in this form. Elements with electromagnetic profiles more commonly associated with artificial constructs than naturally formed minerals. And suddenly, the Webb team wasn't asking if this was alien. They were asking how long it had been watching us, and what it might be hiding behind that glowing trail. For decades, scientists like Avi Loeb have warned that we may not be the ones doing the watching. That perhaps, in all our cosmic curiosity, we've been watched far longer than we've dared to admit. And 3I Atlas may be the first undeniable proof of that. Its behavior isn't random, its path isn't chaotic, its emissions aren't natural, and now, its acceleration isn't gravitational. Everything about this object screams design, from its materials to its timing to its evasive maneuvers. But what is even more haunting is its silence. There are no transmissions, no greetings, no obvious attempts at contact. It moves like a ghost through the night sky, visible only because we've become advanced enough to see it, as if its creators knew we'd be watching now, as if they sent it not to speak, but to test us, to study how we react, to map our response, to assess our threat. And perhaps most chilling of all, some experts now believe 3I Atlas might not be the only one. Because if Oumuamua was the scout, then 3I Atlas may be the sentinel. The probe that comes after the first message is received. The one that moves slower, sees deeper, and doesn't leave. As astronomers continued analyzing the propulsion-like glow trailing behind 3I Atlas, a new anomaly emerged, one that didn't just defy expectations, but violated the very foundations of Newtonian physics. Normally, any mass-emitting propulsion at such a velocity and scale should leave behind a measurable wake, a shift in momentum, a loss of kinetic energy, a thermodynamic cost. But 3I Atlas wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating, slightly, yes, but undeniably. The thrust wasn't being used to brake or stabilize, it was pushing. And yet, despite that, the object maintained perfect structural cohesion, showing no wobble, no disintegration, and no thermal distortion from friction or reactionary force. Scientists at JPL and ESA attempted to simulate this phenomenon in supercomputers, using every known propulsion model, from ion drives to nuclear pulses to antimatter engines. None matched. The only scenario that reproduced anything close to what James Webb observed involved a theoretical propulsion method known as vacuum field manipulation, a propulsion system that doesn't push against matter, but rather bends space-time itself behind the object, creating a pressure differential that allows it to slide forward like a bead of water on curved glass. A technology so advanced it only exists in physics journals and quantum lab fantasies. If this is what's powering 3I Atlas, then it's not just alien, it's post-Newtonian. The kind of machine that wouldn't just be decades ahead of us, but thousands of years. The kind of craft you don't build to visit a solar system. You build it to master it. As the mystery deepened, a team of cryptographers and astrophysicists from multiple observatories started analyzing the pulses of energy emitted from the rear of 3I Atlas. While most focused on trajectory and thermal footprint, one analyst noticed something buried deeper in the noise, a pattern. The pulses weren't just rhythmic, they were encoded. Each burst of exhaust wasn't identical. There were modulations, tiny shifts in timing, amplitude, and frequency, like binary whispers wrapped in fire. Using AI-assisted pattern recognition software originally designed for decoding fast radio bursts, the team ran the pulse data through over 10 million simulations. And that's when something terrifying surfaced. The exhaust trail wasn't just a propulsion system, it was a carrier signal, a broadcast embedded inside the act of movement itself. Every pulse carried data, digital fingerprints composed of ratios, geometric harmonics, and non-random prime sequences. Not noise, not coincidence, but a deliberate signal. What chilled researchers the most was where the signal was pointed, not toward Earth, not toward our satellites or our telescopes, but outward, directly into deep space, toward a region with no known stars or celestial bodies. Some believe it's a distress signal, others think it's a log, a stream of data reporting back to its origin point. But there's a more unsettling theory circulating in classified channels. It's a beacon, not a message asking for help, but an activation code, a knock, a coded invitation to something or someone on the other side of the void. While attention remained focused on the skies, strange things began happening much closer to home. Around the world, magnetic anomaly detectors, usually quiet unless registering solar storms or seismic activity, began to light up. Not in a chaotic surge, but in synchrony. From Iceland to Antarctica, Siberia to Chile, ultra-low frequency signals began pulsing through Earth's crust. Not strong enough to cause damage, but precise enough to alarm researchers. The frequency? Identical to the pattern embedded in the propulsion exhaust of 3I Atlas. What followed was even more bizarre. Migratory patterns in birds and marine mammals shifted, synchronized deviations across entire continents. GPS systems in high-altitude drones momentarily failed. Satellites in low orbit began receiving faint electromagnetic echoes that seemed to reflect off the upper atmosphere, from below, as if Earth itself were answering a call, or worse, reactivating an old protocol. The theory spreading through private research circles is controversial, but gaining momentum, that Earth may hold ancient, dormant systems, biological, magnetic, or technological, that were never meant to be active again. And 3I Atlas, by entering our system and emitting this precise signal, has triggered something hidden, not just in orbit, but in the planet itself. A memory, a reaction, a synchronization, and no one knows what comes next. Then, just as tension reached its peak, everything stopped. The pulses, the exhaust, the thermal signature. James Webb's next scan showed 3I Atlas cold, still, and eerily quiet. No glow, no bursts, no course corrections. It was as if the object had shut down, or gone dormant. At first, scientists celebrated. Perhaps it was a malfunction, a fuel depletion, a system crash. Maybe it had finally revealed itself as natural after all. But the silence didn't comfort everyone, because the object was still moving, faster than before, and still aligned perfectly with its projected path toward Jupiter. No deviation, no signs of decay, just pure momentum. And that's what terrified analysts behind closed doors. The machine hadn't stopped. It had completed something, finished a phase, or entered one. And then, new data arrived from the Voyager probes, both of them, nearly simultaneously. Each recorded a brief, identical anomaly in deep space, a low-bandwidth electromagnetic shift that aligned perfectly with the moment 3I Atlas ceased its exhaust. The probes had detected it, a silent trigger, a signal not intended for Earth, but for devices beyond Earth's control. The speculation now is no longer about whether 3I Atlas is intelligent. That's been accepted. The new fear is what it just activated, or called, or summoned. Because when a machine that defies physics goes silent, not because it's broken, but because it's done something, we're not in the observation phase anymore. We're in the response window. Hidden in the data of the last signal burst from 3I Atlas was a pattern so precise it couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. A golden spiral of electromagnetic variation, identical to the ratio found in spiral galaxies, DNA structures, and ancient Earth architecture. And within that spiral, researchers found mirrored sequences, echoes of a pulse pattern first identified 8 years ago in a brief, almost forgotten anomaly, the final moments of Oumuamua's passage. Suddenly, what seemed like two disconnected events, two alien visitors 8 years apart, began to look like two phases of the same plan. Oumuamua, small, fast, and silent, had entered and exited our solar system like a ghost. It had no tail, no propulsion, no heat signature. But it did leave one strange electromagnetic echo before vanishing into deep space, an echo now reproduced with amplified precision by 3I Atlas. That's when a theory, once relegated to obscure white papers, resurfaced at the highest levels of astrophysical research, the lock and the key hypothesis. In this model, Oumuamua was never meant to communicate, nor to observe closely. It was simply the lock, an inert artifact containing dormant instructions, possibly embedded within our solar system's electromagnetic field. And 3I Atlas, that's the key, the activator, the second phase. A vessel not just capable of reconnaissance, but of interaction, of executing a protocol that may have been waiting thousands of years to begin. And now, that key has turned. Following the propulsion shutdown, the James Webb team noticed something even stranger. Light from background stars, distant, ancient, and long catalogued, began to bend unnaturally around 3I Atlas. Not as if blocked by its mass, but distorted as if space itself was warping around it. A gravitational lensing effect, yes, but without the mass to justify it. The object isn't massive enough to warp space-time in that way, unless there's something else at play. Webb's instruments began to detect subtle fluctuations in photon arrival times, light appearing microseconds earlier than it should, as if being pulled forward through a ripple in time itself. This wasn't just gravitational warping, it was temporal distortion. A kind of effect theoretical physicists describe only in models involving wormholes, exotic matter, or quantum field compression. More alarmingly, this lensing wasn't stable. It shifted, moved, reacted. The distortion patterns changed whenever Earth-based signals, intentional or not, were broadcast toward the object. It was as if the fabric of space-time around 3I Atlas was alive, adaptive, responsive. And then came the theory that no one wanted to accept publicly. 3I Atlas may not be a spacecraft in the traditional sense. It may be a mobile singularity, a machine designed to manipulate space-time as easily as we manipulate light. Not a vessel, but a gate. And if it is a gate, then it's not the destination that should worry us. It's what's on the other side. Even as the propulsion ceased, the infrared signature of 3I Atlas continued to emit faint, low-temperature patterns, barely above background radiation, but structured in a way no natural object ever would. Using AI-enhanced spectroscopy, scientists parsed the emission layers and discovered a sequence of molecular patterns, not random, but recursive. Patterns resembling carbon lattice structures, the same structures found in advanced organic molecules and synthetic DNA scaffolds. At first, the data looked like noise, but when overlaid with protein folding models, something emerged. A molecular language. Not literal words, but geometry. Sequences that resembled base pairs, folding signatures, encoding routines. It was as if the glow wasn't just a byproduct of heat, but a transmission of biochemical information, a genetic signature, a code. The implications were paralyzing. If this object was carrying the building blocks of life, refined, organized, and delivered across interstellar space, then it might not be a probe at all. It could be a seed, a seeder, engineered not to destroy, but to transform, to terraform, to infect, to replicate. Not in an aggressive way, but in a silent, methodical one. One that doesn't ask permission, one that watches, waits, and then plants itself where the soil is ready. And what if Earth, in all its chaos and advancement, just became the perfect garden? The final act, so far, didn't happen in deep space. It happened somewhere much closer, on the Moon. Just days after Webb detected the suspension of propulsion and Earth's deep-field sensors picked up strange synchronicities in the ionosphere, a private satellite array picked up a powerful burst of non-radio energy directed not at Earth, but at a specific point on the lunar surface. The coordinates were chilling. A mascon, an area of the Moon with an unusually high concentration of mass beneath its surface, located beneath an ancient crater that has long puzzled geologists. For decades, the anomaly had been explained as a relic of early lunar impact history. But now, sensors detected a heat spike, a thermal signature, and then, a vibration. Seismometers placed on the Moon by past missions, long dormant, briefly activated. Their data? A rhythmic pulse, every 11 seconds, identical in frequency to the secondary exhaust emissions from 3I Atlas just days earlier. Suddenly, the idea that 3I Atlas was only observing Earth seemed naive. It was communicating with the Moon, or something beneath it. The idea that the object wasn't just surveying us, but coordinating with in-system structures, turned speculation into full-blown fear. Was something buried on the Moon? Something left behind? Or something waiting for the signal we just witnessed? Because if 3I Atlas has begun activating nodes within our solar system, then this isn't just first contact. This is a countdown. For decades, we believed the search for extraterrestrial life would begin with a signal, clear, mathematical, and meant for us. A greeting, a warning, an invitation. But maybe that was never the plan. Maybe the first true contact wouldn't come as a message, but as a maneuver, as propulsion exhaust caught by the corner of a telescope, as a light that glows in a way it shouldn't, as a pattern that doesn't speak words, but speaks intent. 3I Atlas didn't arrive like a visitor. It didn't decelerate for study. It didn't acknowledge our presence. It came in fast, executed an impossible course, emitted a signal through its own motion, and then went silent. Not broken, not gone, just waiting. Waiting after completing something we don't understand. After waking something we may not even see. After activating something we forgot was ever here. And maybe that's the point. Because what if the exhaust wasn't for propulsion? What if it wasn't meant to steer the object, but to trigger us? What if everything, from the trajectory to the lunar signal, was part of a design so far beyond our understanding that we can't even recognize it as a message? Because maybe we're not the intended recipients. Maybe this entire sequence was never for us, but for something buried deep within our solar system. Something older, something quiet, something that only needed to hear that frequency one more time before it opened its eyes. And that's the most terrifying idea of all, that 3I Atlas wasn't our first contact. It was their first command. So now we ask ourselves, what wakes next? Subscribe to this channel. We go deeper than headlines, beyond science, into the unknown. Turn on notifications, because 3I Atlas may not be alone, and we might not be either. Share this video with someone who still believes space is empty. And tell us in the comments, do you think 3I Atlas came to explore us, or to awaken something else? Because sometimes, the silence between stars is just the breath before the reply.